This is Buffalo State Data Talk, the podcast where we introduce you to how data is used and explore careers that involve data. In today's episode, we talk to Peter Yacobucci, Associate Professor of Political Science and Public Administration at Buffalo State College. Peter walks us through how he collects and analyzes data and how his results have influenced the decisions of future Supreme Court rulings. Keep listening to hear the advice that Peter has learned through his path to a career in data analytics. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Buffalo State Data Talk. I'm your host, Heather Campbell, and we appreciate you joining us for episode 8. Today, we'll be talking to Peter Yacobucci, Associate Professor of Political Science and Public Administration at Buffalo State College. Thanks for joining us today, Peter.
So happy to talk to you.
So, as an expert in constitutional law who's extensively studied the Supreme Court, can you give us an overview of the work that you do in this area?
So basically what I try to do is look for patterns in decision making that explain logical inferences. So I'm studying both the members of the Supreme Court and other members of lower level courts to try and determine why they come to the conclusions that they do. I do this through data analytics. Unlike most previous legal research was done by parsing the words that are in opinions. While I do that, a lot of what I do is I look at patterns of justices over time in their decision making, assuming that generally they stay consistent over time, and seeing if I can determine patterns to not only figure out why decisions were made, but make predictions about future decisions that may be coming before the court.
So the data that you collect, what information are you collecting and where are you getting it from?
So the information I'm collecting generally is the type of case that's being decided. Is it a case about civil rights? Is it a taxation case? Is it a torts law case, or one of the different areas of the law? I'm looking at who the litigants are. Is the litigant a sophisticated big firm? Is a litigant an average person like you or I? I'm looking at what's the ideology within that opinion. Many court cases have a liberal position or conservative position. Many court cases do not have a liberal or conservative position. Think of a minutia tax case, an interpretation of tax law. And then I'm also looking at then each of the justices. Okay, so I'm looking at a justice. Let's say we stick to the Supreme Court. Justice Gorsuch is nominated and approved on the court by President Donald Trump. President Donald Trump was a Republican. Gorsuch was an active Republican. Does that partisanship make a difference? Does their ideology expressed from previous cases or determined from previous cases make a difference? And many other factors. I'm trying to collect as much data as I can to parse out the impacts of, is it ideology that's pushing this opinion? Is it legal scholarship that's pushing this opinion? Is it background? What is it that causes this justice to rule this way on this case?
So once you've collected all that data and got it together, what kind of programs, software, spreadsheets do you use to organize that data and then analyze it?
I found the easiest thing for me is I simply just use an Excel spreadsheet to create the data set. Once I have the data set established, then I import that data set into a statistical package. Usually it's Stata is a very commonly used social science statistical package, or sometimes SPSS. And then I'm running statistical models. I'm trying to find causation, okay? And using statistical logical inference to determine the causation. Does this factor affect that? Does this factor affect that? While holding all other factors constant. That's what I do a lot in my statistical work.
Could you maybe tell me about a conclusion that was made from some of the data that you analyzed that you found to be interesting or beneficial?
One of the cases that was decided in the past decade was a case that now we refer to as the Hobby Lobby case. It has a much longer name, but it involved the craft store Hobby Lobby. And Hobby Lobby is owned by a family that have conservative Christian beliefs. And one of the parts of their conservative Christian beliefs is they don't believe in same-sex marriage. They don't believe in fully recognizing the rights of individuals that are gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, any of those individuals. That case came before the Supreme Court, and the court was forced to look at the rights of the individuals, the owners of Hobby Lobby, owners of businesses, to have religious free exercise rights and free opinion, religious opinions, which is, of course, in the First Amendment, against the right of individuals to be treated equally in our society without undue or salacious discrimination, bad discrimination. And so the court had to decide that. And what the court came to their conclusion was an individual, the owner of Hobby Lobby in this case, can discriminate against individuals that have a different sexual orientation than a heterosexual orientation, as long as they had a sincerely held religious belief. And they did in this case. So coming out of that opinion a number of years ago, lower courts then had to interpret that opinion to many, many cases of employment and serving customers, and whether an individual, a gay couple that wants to get married, can they get a cake at a certain cake bakery? And there's famous cases like that. Last year, just this last summer, there was another decision made called the Bostic case. Again, court opinions are titled based on the name of the litigants, not about what it's about, which is kind of difficult. But anyways, in the Bostic case, it was a challenge to an employer being able to fire someone solely because they didn't approve of their sexual orientation. In between that time, the Hobby Lobby case and the Bostic case, myself and a number of other colleagues did a large data set of all these other cases. And what we found is these lower courts were misinterpreting Hobby Lobby and making Hobby Lobby a bigger ruling than it should have, which allowed employers to have essentially carte blanche. They can hire and fire anybody they want for no other reason except their orientation. That information made its way into the briefing materials for the Bostic case and became one of the fundamental parts of the Bostic case ruling that if you are discriminating against an individual, an employee, solely because of their sexual orientation, that's a violation of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. And it greatly limited the impact of Hobby Lobby, the original case, on employment situations. And so that's an example of research that was done, by academics, including myself, having an impact on the court making decisions going forward. And it takes years, it takes a long time to do that, but it was a fascinating process to watch both the original case, how it was interpreted in lower courts, how it was misinterpreted in lower courts, and how us as researchers, using data analytics, could then reinform the Supreme Court as a similar issue came up years later.
That's really fascinating and really cool that you were working on that. That's amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are now. So you received your PhD in political science from the University of Arizona, and you also got a Master of Science in public policy from Georgetown. Why did you choose to get these degrees, and how did it affect your career path?
As a caveat, let me say I'm not the best example to follow, and I'll tell you why. So I graduated from high school. And then went on to college, and I was I had a double major in sociology and political science. And what really fascinated me about political science was the public policy side of it. Is how do we solve social problems? So how do we bring down the level of poverty? How do we create a cleaner environment? And that's a policy area. So I thought, okay, I need the skills to be a policy analyst, to someone that could do that. And Georgetown University was the best school at the time. It still is one of the best schools at the time, the McGovern Public Policy Institute. And so I went there to get my degree. And almost as soon as I got there, because I didn't come from a wealthy family, I needed a job. If you've ever been to D.C., D.C. is very expensive. And I was able, working through the school, to become a junior policy analyst in the Department of Justice. Just, in the middle of D.C., which is another reason it's great to study in D.C. And I worked with them as a policy analyst, and they offered me a position before I graduated with my master's degree as a permanent position, which I took. But I said to them, I'm working in the Department of Justice on policies that affect field level implementation of laws. So things that federal law enforcement officers are doing. I said, I need more information on that. I need that end. I said, can you send me out to the field? Like, make me a law enforcement officer out in the field. And they said, sure. And so I went through law enforcement training that they, send all the FBI agents and those things through. I was strangely assigned to Buffalo as my field office, and worked here for several years, and found that I was excellent at policy analysts. I was not the greatest law enforcement officer, mainly because I was too trusting of people. And I thought, well, I can become less trusting of people, or I could do this a different way. And I didn't want to become less trusting of people. So what I did is on a whim, I applied to the University of Arizona for their PhD program in political science. And I think it was a cold day in Buffalo. And I said, where is the warmest place in the United States? And I always wanted to visit the desert. Let me apply to Arizona. And that's why I say that is not the right way to pick your graduate school because of the weather. Please don't do that. I knew nothing about the school. I didn't know anything about the department. But then they accepted me and they gave me a scholarship. And once they gave me a scholarship, I couldn't say no. Again, as I said, I didn't have any money. So I went to Arizona. I absolutely loved the desert. I loved it. Went and was at Arizona for, I think, 6 years, 7 years. Almost finished my PhD. And then I got a job at a little school in Ohio, a Catholic school in Ohio. While I was working there, in fact, before I started working there, the first day I was introduced by the president of the school, not as the new political scientist. I was introduced as the new director of the pre-law program. No one had ever mentioned that to me. Not in the interview process, nothing. And I said, afterwards, I went to the president, and we ended up becoming friends. He was a really good guy. He's since retired. I said, you never even mentioned that in the interview. He goes, well, if I mentioned it in the interview, I figured you wouldn't take the job. And I thought, well, that's what a president would do. And so because of that, I began to research more and more into law, so I could actually know what I was talking about as the pre-law director. And I worked with several of the local law schools, including Akron, Cleveland State, Case Western Reserve. They were all within an hour of where I was living, and became more and more fascinated by the law, more and more fascinated with the process of making legal decisions, of how does a justice, with all this information, determine the right side and the wrong side on a case. And that got me interested. And after about 5 years working there, the University of Akron came to me because I begun to know their admissions people, being a pre-law director. They said, we do a night program. Would you want to go to law school at night? And I agreed to do it. And I went 2 years at night. And then the job opened up here. And my thought was, well, I'd love to get back to Buffalo. Buffalo is my hometown. I grew up in Wales. And so we took the job here. My thought was I would finish my law degree at UB, not knowing that UB does not have a night law program. They only have a day law program. And I was working full-time at Buff State. So I didn't end up finishing my law degree, but I started here 10 years ago, and I've been happily employed by Buff State ever since.
I hear a lot of stories about people who grew up in Buffalo. They leave for school, and a lot of them come back. What made you decide you wanted to come back to Buffalo?
When I left for D.C. in 1991, I never thought I would come back. I'm like, I'm done with the cold. I'm done with blizzards. I'm done. I want to go where it's warm. A couple things about Buffalo. Okay, Buffalo is incredibly cheap to live in, right? And until you've lived in New York City or Washington D.C. or almost anywhere else in the country, you realize how much cheaper it is to live here. You can have a job, buy a house, afford to buy things for your family, actually go on vacations. Whereas in other places, it's so expensive now to live there. So that was a big pulling point. The other things that really made me like Buffalo is, for those people that are not from Buffalo, Buffalo was originally designed to house about 1 million people. Right now it houses well less than 250,000, right? Which means there are no traffic jams. There are no really lines that you ever have to worry about. It's not crowded. The parks aren't overrun. It has great infrastructure. It has wonderful arts communities and cultural communities. It has fantastic food. If you like food, Buffalo is ideal. And more important than all of that to me, for what I do, Buffalo has the most thriving civic community of any city I've ever lived in. And I've lived in a number of places. where people get together, they discuss politics, they discuss books, they are constantly meeting. We have festivals. So Buffalo is a great place. And if you've ever lived through Buffalo in the summer, it has the most ideal weather in the world for summer. Winters are rough, summers are fantastic.
Oh, the winters aren't that bad.
No, they're not that bad. But look, as someone who lived in Arizona, they're not Arizona.
That's definitely true. So you started off your career in political science, and then you moved to more law and Supreme Court. So how exactly did data science fit into all this? When did that start, and how did you move into that area?
Oh, that started really young. I've always loved math, loved it. And ever when I went to school, I was very good at math. Math came very, very easily to me. And so when I went to college, I focused on, I took a lot of classes in statistics and data processing. I was one of the very early people to start computer programming, back when you actually used to code in BASIC and DOS and those type of things. And it just sort of came together. And so then when I went to Georgetown to get my master's degree in public policy, a lot of studying public policy is numbers, is, how do we know if a program works? Well, we've got to collect numbers on what was before, what was after, and then use statistical inference to see, did it make a difference? Was it worth it? Was it cost benefit? So I took a lot of classes at Georgetown based in numbers and quantitative analysis. And it's something that I found easy, enjoyable, understandable. And what I found, especially over the last decade, is no matter what field you're in, whether you're in the arts, whether you're in education, whether you're in a policy area, legal like I am, the ability to use numbers, to organize numbers, and to analyze numbers through logical inference is becoming more and more important in any field. If, for example, if you want to work in the arts now are becoming more and more funded by competitive grants. You have to show the grantor, why should they give you money? That just you show up and say, well, we're good at arts. That's not good enough. You have to show the impact you have, and you have to show that quantitatively. And I think the ability to do that and the ability to show that for what I do now legally has reinterpreted the way we think of courts and reinterpreted the way we think of decision making on courts.
Your path that you took, you said you wouldn't necessarily recommend. Students often, ask what skills or education they need to go into a specific career. If somebody's interested in data science, what do you think are the most important hard or soft skills that they would need?
Well, I think if you're interested in data skills, you probably have, at least are comfortable with numbers. I don't think many people that are, that hate math and hate numbers and hated math all the way through school are considering data analytics unless their parents are forcing them to do it. So if you're comfortable with numbers, and you do not have to be good at math, the most complicated models I run, the computer does the math for me. I just got to know how to interpret the results. I think what employers are looking for, at least when I speak to employers about graduates that I produce, they want somebody that's proficient in using numbers and analyzing with numbers. But what they really want is someone that can do that and then interpret it and provide that to an audience that isn't, right? Can you write? Can you orally present your findings to someone else? And I tell my students all the time that take my statistics class, it's great if you can run the model, but if you can't explain what the model did, it's useless. Okay? You have to be able to explain it to individuals that don't know statistics, that don't know quantitative analysis. So what I always recommend students is, of course, you've got to get the data side down, the science side down. But besides that, take English classes, take oral speaking classes. I encourage students to do theaters, to do any performance art that you can think of, where you're up before an audience that's looking at you and judging you. If you're comfortable speaking on your feet, if you're comfortable making a presentation, that's going to be a big skill that's going to help you throughout your career. If you do data analytics or any other field.
Yeah, communication is really important in any area. And I think that when you have such a central job that you're analyzing data for whatever field you end up in, healthcare or law or wherever you are, you have to be able to show that the work that you're doing is important. And why are they paying you? Why are you there? here are the results, and you have to be able to show the data that you've collected and why it's important for their company.
Right. As I say this, for your entry-level job, you're most likely going to be doing analysis for a person that doesn't have the skills you do. They don't have the quantitative skills you do. But you have to be able to give them the ability to then take the information you provided them for them to turn around and sell it to their boss above them in a comprehensive, meaningful, and objective way. And so that's so important, the ability to communicate both orally and in written form, whether it's a memo, a short report, clear, concise, right to the point, punchy language. If you can do that, employers will love you and you'll get promoted very quickly.
So this is the last question. Before we let you go, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know that we weren't able to cover today?
What I will tell people is for data analytics, every field, okay, whether it's in a science community, like an academic like I am, whether it's in a for-profit company, whether it's in a nonprofit organization or a government organization, the need for people to be able to analyze data, organize it, and then be able to interpret it to people that don't have those skills is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. As our computer power, our storage power has gone up, data has exploded, especially big data, and people that know how to manipulate that big data and use it to the benefit of whatever institution they're going to work for will always be able to find a job and will always have a very well-paying career.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. And to all of our listeners, if you haven't already checked out our previous podcasts, they're available wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more information about starting your career as a data scientist, go to dataanalytics.buffalostate.edu. And don't forget to subscribe so that you get a notification each time we release a new episode of Buffalo State Data Talk.